Hi everyone, I'm Dan from JazzComposersPresent.com, an online space where composers, musicians, and listeners come together to celebrate the music we love. I'm joined today by Alexa Tarantino, saxophonist, composer, and educator who tours internationally with ARTEMIS, Cecile McLorin Salvant, and Wynton Marsalis. Alexa is here to show us how to compose intervallically.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for having me, Dan. I'm so happy to be a part of JazzComposersPresent.com. Such an amazing space for composers and arrangers, and it's an honor to be a part of it. So let's get started. I am here to share a little tidbit of my compositional thinking that I'm calling Intervallic Inspiration, the power of intervals in composition and development. So I'm going to share my 3 strategies for how I use intervals in my small group writing. I have released 3 records as a band leader and been on many other recordings as a side person. And I always find, as primarily a woodwind player and educator who kind of squeezes in that time to write new music for my own records, I'm constantly looking for inspiration, ways to jumpstart my themes, developing my themes, into eventually creating full-blown pieces. And it's a learning process for me to this day, as I'm sure everybody else on this amazing platform has shared. We are always learning and growing. But something that I really gravitate towards is thematic development, finding a small nugget, a small motive, and really making the most out of it and telling a story with it. And intervals are a way for me to do that. So my first tip is to really think about how you can stretch out intervals in the context of your melody. If you come up with even just 2 or 3 pitches and sort of analyze the intervallic differences and the way that they kind of collect as a cell, you'd be surprised how much you can kind of jumble them up, stretch them out, put them into retrograde, repeat them a few times, and then change something about them. Transpose them into different keys, alternate them. If you've got 3 or 4 notes, finding different ways to collect them, you'd be surprised how something that was initially just your standard first theme becomes and grows into all this new material that you hadn't expected you'd have in the first place. So we will listen to, in a little bit, we'll listen to a piece of mine called Calm, where I really stuck with this idea of a major 6th interval at first, and then slowly sort of tweaked it and filled in that interval along the way. And that was how this melody just came to be. I took da, 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 and ended up stretching that out, adding some extra enclosures around it, some extra stepwise notes around it. And the next thing I knew, I had a phrase that really didn't feel too unrelated. It felt like it was connected and that there was a through line all the way from the beginning to the end, because this idea of this interval stuck with me all the way, even if it was something new, even if it was a way of recollecting the notes. To me, I felt like I was developing in a way that was genuine, as opposed to sort of throwing new and random things on top of the theme throughout. So that's my first suggestion, is, just to explore picking a couple of notes, creating a cell for your melody, and seeing how far it can take you. Do not feel pressured into needing to, reinvent the wheel and throw new things in there. Again, you'd be surprised with how much you can stretch out a small cell. And then in harmony, which is my second point, I think a lot of us would also be surprised just to see how much we can create a harmonic environment with just a small cell of 2 or 3 or 4 notes. I think a lot of us are used to seeing, standard chord changes, A minor 7, D7, G major 7, but you can also come up with some really interesting clusters, and you don't have to be afraid of them if you don't have a name for them, or, a standard name for them. So I really think about the story that I'm trying to tell, the emotion that I'm trying to evoke, the tension and the release that I'm trying to create in my harmonic progressions. And so I really try not to put myself into a box with any sort of standard or almost automatic processing of chords. I try to stay really true to this is a particular interval that I'm hearing. This is a particular shape that I've been working with. And if I keep this shape going with this particular bass note and then shift it here and there, what actually happens and what does it feel like and where are we going? So I think it's really interesting to explore thinking of harmonic progressions from more of an intervallic perspective. That could mean from the way your bass notes are traveling, your roots are traveling. Joe Henderson, famously, a lot of his chord progressions moved in thirds. It could be that you are really sticking to a particular interval that's relevant in many of the chords that you're using. Perhaps you really like a tritone and that's lending itself to more dominant 7#11 chords, for example. So those are kind of the two, if we're looking at sort of the top and the bottom of the way that I like to write, that's how I stick to stretching out intervals in my melodies and how I kind of think of them and include them in my harmonic progression. So why don't we take a look at my piece Calm. This is from my record Winds of Change from a few years ago, and you'll hear myself, Nick Finzer, Christian Sands, Joe Martin, and Rudy Royston. As I mentioned, focusing on intervals helps me to create new material that is still rooted in what I originally started with. And it helps me to develop things in a way that I would have never expected. And it sort of sparks new ideas for me along the way. And so again, in a melody such as Calm, where I started with that major 6 idea and then decided to ascend at times, descend at times, fill in a stepwise gap at times, there were lots of different twists and turns that melody ended up taking that I never planned on. And so it's really exciting to see how when you have sort of that initial cell and you have an idea of the emotion that you're trying to evoke, you're not afraid to repeat a cell a few times. You're not afraid to experiment putting things in retrograde or transposing them, or really highlighting certain intervals and the bass and harmonic progressions there. Things kind of unravel and grow into a story. And so that's how I really like to compose for my small group. And I encourage you all to try it if you haven't already. And sometimes even doing it away from an instrument can be really exciting, and just kind of messing with some things on pen and paper, even away from the piano, can start to jog things that take you outside of your tendencies, outside of your comfort zones. And so that's why I just want to encourage you, don't be afraid if something that you're coming up with doesn't fit into, traditional chord changes, traditional, kind of range or movement. And think about this in terms of your improvisation as well, for anyone who's out there also playing in groups. I use these concepts in my development as an improviser all the time, and I really enjoy it. So I hope this was helpful, and feel free to reach out to me with any questions at alexatarantino.com.
Thanks for watching today's mini lesson. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Drop any questions, comments, or suggestions for future videos in the comment section down below. To watch our full-length events and participate in live Q&As with our presenting artists, head over to jazzcomposerspresent.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.